This oral presentation will be about genetically modified organisms or GMOs. To start with, what is a genetically modified organism? Genetically modified organism can be defined as organisms in which the genetic material has been altered in a way that does not occur naturally. Next, why are GM foods produced? GM foods are developed and marketed because there is some perceived advantage either to the producer or consumer of these foods. This is meant to translate into a product with a lower price, greater benefit, or both. The initial objective for developing plants based on GM organisms was to improve crop protection. The GM crops currently on the market are mainly aimed at an increased level of crop protection through the introduction of resistance against plant diseases caused by insects or viruses or through increased tolerance towards herbicides. Next, how are the potential risks to human health determined? The safety assessment of GM foods generally examine A. Direct health effects or toxicity, B. Tendencies to provoke allergic reaction or allergenicity, and C. Specific components thought to have nutritional or toxic properties.
What are the main issues of concern for human health? The three main issues debated are the following: tendencies to provoke allergic reaction or allergenicity, gene transfer, and outcrossing. Allergenicity. As a matter of principle, the transfer of genes from commonly allergenic foods are discouraged unless the protein product of the transferred genes are not allergenic. While traditionally, developed foods are not generally tested for allergenicity, protocols for tests for GM foods have been evaluated by the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, or FAO, and World Health Organization, or WHO. No allergic effects have been found relative to GM foods currently on the market. Gene transfer. Gene transfer from GM foods to the cells of the body or to a bacteria in the gastrointestinal tract would cause concerns if the transferred genetic material adversely affects human health. This would particularly relevant if antibiotic resistance genes used in creating GMOs were to be transferred. Although the probability of transfer is low, the use of technology without antibiotic resistance genes has been encouraged by a recent FAO or WHO expert panel. Outcrossing. It is the movement of genes from GM plants into conventional crops or related species in the wild. It is also the mixing of crops derived from conventional seeds with those grown using GM crops. It may have an indirect effect on food safety and food security.
Issues of concern include the capability of GMO to escape and potentially introduce the engineered genes into wild populations, the persistence of the gene after the GMO has been harvested, the susceptibility of non-target organisms to the gene product, the stability of the gene, the reduction in the spectrum of other plants including loss of biodiversity, and increased use of chemicals in agriculture. The environmental safety aspects of GM crops vary considerably according to local conditions. Are GM foods safe? Different GM organisms include different genes inserted in different ways. This means that individual GM foods and their safety should be assessed on a case-by-case basis, and that is not possible to make general statements on the safety of all GM foods. GM foods currently available on the international market have passed risk assessments and are not likely to present risk for human health. In addition, no effects on human health have been shown as a result of consumption of such foods by general populations. In the countries where they have been approved, continuous use of assessment based on the Codex principles and where appropriate, including post-market monitoring, should form the basis of evaluating the safety of GM foods.
What kind of GM foods are on the market internationally? All GM crops available on the international market today have been designed using one of three basic traits: resistance to insect damage, resistance to viral infections, and tolerance towards certain herbicides. All the genes used to modify crops are derived from microorganisms. What further developments can be expected in the area of GMOs? Future GM organisms are likely to include plants with improved disease or drought resistance, crops with increased nutrient levels, fish species with enhanced growth characteristics, and plants or animals producing pharmaceutically important proteins such as vaccines.